Thanks for joining us on The Catholic View for Women, where we give you news and views from a truly Catholic perspective. I'm Teresa Tomeo, along with my co-hosts Astrid Bennett Gutierrez and Janet Morana. And also we bring you very special greetings from our pastoral director, who works with us so closely behind the scenes to help make sure that we do a good job and that we're theologically correct. And thanks be to God, so far no issues.
So far,
we have
so
a great
good.
pastoral director. And of course, great direction here at EWTN. A big thanks and a shout out to the one, the only, Father Frank Pavone, who's the National Director, of course, of Priests for Life. I really like this topic, ladies. We're talking about intimate graces for your marriage.
That's right.
Yes, how timely.
It
You know,
is.
with all the crisis of marriage in the
And
news.
the Year of Mercy,
And the Year
right?
of Mercy
Mercy.
coming up.
Yep.
If
yep.
you strengthen marriage, I mean, everything else, I think, will go along
Well,
with it.
John Paul II said, as a family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes
That's
the
right.
world. Right.
Yes.
When we talk about the works of mercy, of course, there's the spiritual and the corporal works of mercy. And so maybe what we should do for our listeners and for ourselves, we should just review them, because I made a nice little list here. It's because the teacher, is going to go through the list. Well, let's start with the corporal works of mercy, which are to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to harbor the harborless, or if it knows to get homeless. Right. Those are old-fashioned words, harbor the harborless, but homes to the homeless, to visit the sick, to ransom the captive, and to bury the dead. I mean, I don't care. I don't think I've listened to that list since I was in catechism in grammar
Right.
school. I mean, or confirmation classes. But sometimes you need a little refresher. Oh, corporal works of mercy. So maybe we need to look at that and say, what am I doing on that list?
Right.
Have I even thought about that recently? Sometimes when they have the collection at church for the food pantry, you'll say, okay, but are we doing something every week about people that are really in need like that?
Right.
Yes, and how beautiful that, Teresa Tomeo, you have a new book,
Yes.
Intimate Graces, which applies these corporal works of mercy and spiritual works of mercy as well to marriage.
Which I co-wrote with my husband, Deacon Dom.
Yes,
Ah,
beautiful
yes,
gift
yes.
to the church.
Well, let's go over the spiritual works of mercy. You want to list those?
Okay, teacher again.
Yep.
Here we go, teacher. Well, of course, the spiritual works of mercy are to instruct the ignorant, to counsel the doubtful, to admonish sinners, to bear wrongs patiently, to forgive offenses willingly, to comfort the afflicted, to pray for the living and the dead. I mean, some of these, Teresa, first of all, I mean, when you think about this, to bear wrongs patiently, that's probably, like how quick it is when someone's done something wrong to us. Even if it's in the tape recorder in our brain, we're playing it over and over again. Father Pavone was my spiritual director for many years, and he used to say what we need to do is press the stop button and stop rewinding the tape. Because isn't that what we tend to do? If someone did something, especially within our family, the recording keeps playing. And it's very hard to bring about forgiveness if you keep going back to what happened.
To bear wrongs patiently and to forgive offenses willingly.
Yeah.
That's another one.
That's another one.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a grace and a gift not only to the person, but when you finally forgive, you feel like you're free, free, and then free to love that person. Because if you're holding a grudge, you're not even probably praying for that person,
Right.
So what a gift to be able to practice
Right.
this.
And of course that comes in here with to pray for the living and the dead. I think very often we only pray for them or needs of ourselves in the moment. Like, okay, Lord, pray for my daughter who's trying to pass her exam. Pray, you know what I mean? Like, but do we pray for them just on a daily basis in general? Or things like that. Of course, for the dead, we usually always pray for those. We pray for them at Mass, but I don't know, like, do we just do it when we have a specific need, or why don't we just pray for our family relations, to improve, because very often, especially I always find around different holidays, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, the tensions mount, when you say, and that's when we really have to practice these spiritual works of mercy.
But how many of us think about the works of mercy, whether it be the corporal or the spiritual works of mercy, to apply them to our relationships, whether it's a marriage, whether
Right.
it's friends, whether it's somebody in the immediate family? Because I think growing up, as you said, Janet, we were taught to, and I think beautifully, to understand this is to make a difference out there in the world. And we would associate them, of course, with many of the beautiful teachings of the Church on social justice, which are great. But this gives it a whole new perspective when you go through this list, as we had to do for the book. and really apply it to relationships, especially
right.
marriage.
But, so Teresa, I mean, especially for Deacon Dominic, I was at Dominic's ordination. It was so beautiful, and now you're the wife of a deacon, which is a special role. See, everyone knows her as Teresa Tomeo, the radio hostess that's with the mostest, but they don't realize she's also the wife of a deacon, which has a whole nother
Yes,
level of
a whole different
responsibilities.
role, right.
God, that's wonderful.
And I bet you can address this. Being the wife of a deacon, you can say like that, and probably you talk to the other deacons' wives, it puts another little strain onto the marriage, right? Because of now he's got to be all over doing baptisms and helping at wake services and all this. And what does that do?
Well, I think there's a big responsibility that comes with the diaconate. And for us, I think we were prepared for it because my life has always been so extremely busy with my work as
Right.
prior in the secular media and even now in Catholic ministry. But we had some good prep time because formation for a deacon in most archdioceses or dioceses is between 4 and 5 years.
Wow.
And so during that time, they're going to formation weekends, they're going to classes in the Archdiocese of Detroit. They take their classes, their education portion of it is done at the fantastic Sacred Heart Major Seminary. So he was gone 2 or 3 nights a week.
Right.
And then he had formation weekends once a month, which I had to attend with him. And then he had internships that he had to do. And he had, other activities. He had to go for practice, sessions regarding, the altar and the altar preparation and whatnot and homiletics and everything. So that kind of prepared us for the busyness of being a deacon. And usually now during the week, because he still works full time, so that adds on to it.
Adds on, right.
He usually has about 2 or 3 events during the week, whether it's a funeral service he has to preside over, or maybe he has a parish council meeting or something else, and then he has 2 or 3 weekends, or 2 or 3 masses over the weekend, and he preaches once a month. But I will say this, for me, it is such a blessing to see him blossoming in his diaconate. I don't see it as a burden. And I guess maybe because I'm used to being so busy. And some people say to me, well, don't you miss sitting with him and at Mass?
Right,
And
yeah.
I'd say, a little bit, but when I see him up on the altar, my heart just bursts because seeing him on the altar and seeing him ordained to me was such an amazing witness of what God can do. I mean, our marriage wasn't, and we're very open about this. We're open about this in the book, and we're open about this in our testimony. Our marriage was on the rocks, and God came in and just literally turned our lives around. And the fact that he's a deacon and I'm a Catholic TV and talk show host, it's like, what?
The fruitfulness in your marriage
Yeah.
and for souls is incredible.
Yeah.
Now he's
That's
a
right.
deacon and you're teaching the Catholic faith through the airwaves and through this show.
Yeah.
Well, I also remember because I was at the ordination, and I remember the next day at Mass, when Dominic was on the altar for the first time as a deacon. I think we were both practically crying.
it was very
we were crying,
emotional.
and it
Yeah.
was very emotional, but it was so beautiful. And of course, Father Frank Pabone was there celebrating
Yes.
with your pastor, and it was like, forget it. Teresa and I were a mess.
It was just the two
We
of
were a
them up
mess.
there. Yeah,
Praise
yeah.
God.
You
That's
know,
wonderful.
but tell me just briefly the other deacons' wives, because you now, you come together for retreats and
Right.
what are, because people might be listening right now and they might be curious, gee, maybe my husband is being called to a deacon, but what happens to my relationship with him and everything? What can you speak
Well,
to that?
what they tell you in formation is that God first, family second, diaconate third. That you God and the family still have to come first. And
Right.
so, and I can only speak personally for what the program we went through in the Archdiocese of Detroit, but they're very serious about that. And they're very good when they place you in a parish. They don't place you somewhere, an hour away from your home, as best as they can, especially in an archdiocese the size of Detroit, because we have over 300 parishes. So literally our new parish, St. Isaac Jogues, is a mile from the house.
So that
it's
makes
a
it
beautiful
easy.
parish with a wonderful pastor. So they were great. But in terms of, it's a process you go through, and you accept the fact that, he's making a huge commitment to the church, as we saw in the ordination when they lay down on the altar. That's very, very powerful. But to me, it's mostly been joyful. I'm very close to the wives that I went through formation with, our husbands, being ordained all at the same
Right.
time. And we're so excited and feel like this is such a blessing that I haven't heard any complaints, really.
That's great.
We
Well, so
love being a
maybe-
deacon's wife. It's a powerful ministry.
And of course, the diaconate, I think, is growing all over the country.
Yes.
So maybe will be an inspiration. Maybe God is calling someone
I think it's
watching
important,
right
though,
now,
to note, and getting back to the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, it's all about putting the other person first, which is what
First.
marriage is supposed to be anyway.
Right.
And the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, which we addressed in the book, which we're going to talk about after the break, they really help you align your thinking properly
Right.
as a spouse. And for me, I love the fact that I can put Dominic first in this, because for so long my career, which was so demanding, was first. And they do a very good job of preparing you for this through formation. But the women have to be signed on to this, because this is what's important about the diaconate, because it's not just the husband, because there are men. We did have one of our friends who was ordained, and he's single, so he will remain single the rest of his life because he became a deacon now and can't get married. But the rest of them were married men with children and grandchildren, and the women have to be along every step of the way. As a matter of fact, before they went for their ordination, we had to sign a letter in front of our auxiliary bishop to say that we approved of this and that we were in sync with this. So it's very much an involved thing, the diaconate, for husbands and wives. And if the wives aren't on board, then they will say, well, you need to step back and maybe pray about this. But we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk more about intimate graces for marriage, applying the corporal and spiritual works of mercy to your relationship. And even if you're not married, this is something that we can all learn from, and we can all apply in our day-to-day relationships with our family, with our friends, and with our brothers and sisters in Christ. This is a Catholic View for Women. Teresa Tomeo, Astrid Bennett Gutierrez, and Janet Morana will be right back. Stay tuned. Thanks so much for joining us on another episode of the Catholic View for Women, continuing our discussion on intimate graces for marriage and other relationships, because we can certainly apply the corporal and spiritual works of mercy to other relationships in addition to marriage.
That's right. Yep. Well, of course, and recently I was with you, Teresa, at an event in Michigan, and I caught up with your editor, Heidi Saxton.
It was her idea for the book. People keep asking me where we got the idea, and she came to us. Never even thought of applying the spiritual and the corporal works of mercy to marriage.
So I kind of asked her, okay, come on, inquiring minds want to know, Heidi, how did you get Teresa to write this book? So let's see what Heidi had to say.
My husband Craig and I have been married for 16 years, and we've adopted 2 beautiful children from foster care. And when Teresa and I were working on her book together, and I had talked with Teresa about doing a book about how the spiritual and corporal works of mercy apply to married life, I immediately started thinking about how those works affected my marriage to Craig, and who I married because, after all, he was the smartest and the kindest man I'd ever met. Just for his very life, he would embody these spiritual and corporal, especially the corporal works of mercy, and I saw him do it every day in the life of our children. One day, the Feed the Hungry was one example where when we first got our children, my son, who was at 3 at the time, he had this insatiable need to eat cheese doodles. He would go do almost anything that you asked him if you had a cheese doodle in your hand. But the one thing he would never do is get anywhere close to Craig, because he was afraid of men. And so Craig would get a bowl of cheese doodles, and he would sit on the couch, and he would say, "Christopher, come share this bowl of cheese doodles with me." Christopher would say, "No." And then he'd say, "Oh, come on, Christopher, they're delicious. Here." He'd take one, he would chew it. "Oh, they're delicious, Christopher. Won't you come and have some cheese doodles with me?" "No." And Christopher would be hiding underneath the table and would refuse to come out. So finally, Craig, who's 6'2", big man, would get down on his hands and knees, and he would crawl a little closer to the table, and he would push the bowl just a little bit closer to Christopher. Christopher would reach out and grab a cheese doodle and dive back underneath the table. And over time, over the course of about a week, the bowl would get closer and closer back to the sofa, and Craig would be on there. And then after about a week, I would come up there and I would find the 2 of them with orange rings around their faces. Craig had found a way to feed my son body and soul. And for that reason, and for many others, I am so thankful that he's my husband. In this book, Intimate Graces, Teresa shares her own stories with Dominic. And I came to appreciate and admire how much the 2 of them really complement each other in the way that they bring out the best in sharing those kinds of graces, the way that my husband shared those graces with our children. And I'm hoping that in reading this book that you're going to find new ways to experience and to bless others with those graces as well. Marriage is one of the most intimate of all human relationships. This person gets to see you at your very best and your very worst. And sometimes, like I was 35 when I went into marriage. My husband was 45. We had lived very full lives before we entered into that sacrament, and we brought a lot of baggage with us as a result. And one of the intimate graces that I experienced, and through the spiritual and corporal works of mercy, which are really expressions of God's love for us. We imitate God by practicing these works of mercy on other people, and particularly on our spouse. These the works of mercy are like little windows into the heart of God, and they teach us how to show authentic love to other people, and especially at the times when people are least lovable. You know, when they are hurting, or when they're afraid, or when something is going on and they seem a little remote or distant or cut off from that intimacy of your marriage. Sometimes being able to reach out in that very practical way can make the difference between restoring peace and continuing the tension. And so these works of mercy are both a healing medicine for the one who's hurting, but it's also an encouragement and a balm for the one who has been hurt. My parents have celebrated just 52 years of marriage, or did last January, when a stroke suddenly changed their lives forever. And my mother was placed in a memory care facility. And after 52 years of marriage, my father, who had been taken care of all those years by my mother, who stayed at home and took care of him, suddenly found himself in a marriage to someone who was very angry, inexplicably angry, and very cut off from the rest of the world. And so I've sat there and I've watched my father as he's continued to love and continued to reach out to her, even when she wasn't able to receive it. And I think there are going to be times in marriage where those acts of mercy that we try to extend to the other person won't be understood or won't necessarily be received. And yet they're also a measure of grace for us, so that the hurts that we receive at the hands of a spouse who is himself or herself hurting, those things don't need to wound us as deeply if we're willing to continue to extend ourselves, just trusting in God's providence and that God will bring about what's best for both of us and will guide us both safely to heaven. So if you're out there and you're in a place in your marriage where you feel like you're not being heard, you're not being understood, you're not being loved, these mercies that you can read about in Intimate Graces and by meditating on, what measure of grace do you want me to bring to this person, God, for my sake as well as hers, or as well as his? What can I do so that I can be more like you today?
Wow.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And of course,
I'm really
this is the book.
enjoying your book, Teresa, Intimate Graces. And what it shows is that by applying these corporal and spiritual works of mercy to your spouse, you're loving them. And love is the meaning of marriage. And one particular anecdote that I just love in this book, and it's a wonderful book, but this really shows how love allows you to see the person the way God sees the person. This is from Deacon Dom, your husband.
Yeah, that's the other thing about the book is we each wrote it in our own voice.
Yes.
I wrote part of it, and then Dom wrote part of it, and then there were other couples that gave their testimonies, and they did the same thing. It was the man and the woman writing separately.
Yes, a great style, and this one story really illuminates when you see somebody with eyes of love. So one of my favorite stories from Teresa's childhood is about the girly fort, her words, that she and a few friends built in her backyard when she was about 10 years old. Teresa has always been physically strong for her size, so when I first heard how she beat up the neighborhood bully who had totally wrecked their fort, I just thought it was a cute kids being kids type of story. It wasn't until a few years later, having come to understand the passions and desires the Lord had instilled in her, that her actions as a 10-year-old revealed not a vengeful person, but one who hated injustice wherever it was found.
Yeah,
and it makes sense, for the work that you do, talking about pro-life issues, whatever's happening in the world, you're so passionate on the radio and here, so it really shows that he sees you for who you are and what God did in you.
That's a real interesting story because that young man, Sammy, we're friends now. His parents still live down the street. And actually he eventually apologized. Now, certainly we are not in any way, shape, or form recommending violence or any type of physical altercations to solve a problem. But it rose out of because he and he even admitted later, he said, yeah, I was a pretty bad kid. He basically just ruled the roost and bullied everyone. Right. And he ran ramshot over the neighborhood. And I felt that this was so unfair. How could one little boy make everyone else so miserable? And why are we putting up with this? And the
That's
girly
right.
fort
He
was
has to
the
be
straw that
stopped.
broke the camel's back. But again, as Dominic recognized, it was I can't stand injustice. That's why I'm so pro-life. It just drives me absolutely nuts. And I'm like that when people attack Jesus. I'm like that when people attack the church. Not that I go around and get into fist fights. No,
Right.
I'm talking about a passion. You know,
To
the passion
defend
that I have
people.
to defend. But that's where applying the corporal and spiritual works of mercy come in terms of understanding that person. As Heidi told those beautiful stories of her husband,
Yes.
understanding who they are and how they represent Christ to you.
Well, and Teresa, this book is so timely now because we are in the midst of the
That's
year
right.
of mercy.
And you know something I forgot to tell you two beautiful ladies, that Heidi approached me long before the Year of Mercy was even announced. She approached me 3 years ago at the Catholic Marketing Network and said, you know, T, I've got this great book idea for you and Dom, and I think blah, blah, blah. And we thought, oh, that's really neat. Let me talk to Dom about it. And he really liked it. And then right after we signed the contract for the manuscript, the Pope announces the Year of Mercy. Coincidence? I think not.
God's
That's
timing.
right.
Yes.
Well, and speaking of Pope Francis, I have a little quote I'd like to read that I think also goes quite well here. And this is from actually the homily he gave at Divine Mercy Sunday in 2015. And of course, that was leading up to when he had announced the Year of Mercy that we're in the midst of. And here we go. We will be asked if we have helped others to escape the doubt that causes them to fall into despair, and which is often a source of loneliness. If we have helped to overcome the ignorance in which millions of people live, especially children deprived of the necessary means to free them from the bonds of poverty. If we have been close to the lonely and afflicted. If we have forgiven those who have offended us and have rejected all forms of anger and hate that lead to violence. If we have had the kind of patience God shows, who is so patient and kind with us, and if we have commended our brothers and sisters to the Lord in prayer. Beautiful, beautiful quote. Because he's kind of saying, well, if you've done this and done this and this, then you have been practicing
Whatever you do for the
these
least
works.
of my brothers,
Right.
that would be,
Yeah.
that's what you're doing.
And I gotta say, ladies, I mean, being in the pro-life movement in particular and the pregnancy center movement, these corporal works of mercy and spiritual works of mercy
are so
every single
Right.
day. I mean, even the bury the dead, we mourn the children that are aborted, and pregnancy centers also help moms who miscarry.
Right.
You know, find a funeral service, and so every single one of these applies. So if people want to know what the pro-life movement is doing, apart from teaching, we are helping women and their children and men too every single day.
While
That's
feeding the hungry. I
feeding
mean,
the
you
hungry.
literally help people with
Clothing the
finances,
naked,
clothing the naked. You
everything.
help
Find them homes
literally
to
find
live
them
if they
homes,
need
give them clothes,
places to live.
diapers.
Visiting the sick. We have
Yeah.
many moms who are going through difficult pregnancy situations. We're with them, guiding them towards good pro-life doctors. So, I mean, all of these things, when I was reading it, it was so evident that in the church, and particularly the pro-life movement, we're practicing this. So just a salute to all those working in the centers, Thank you very much.
Also, and I think about the way we apply the corporal and spiritual works of mercy in our own life with other
Right.
relationships, because I was asked to do a talk on this book not too long ago, but it was a mixture of married couples and singles and people at different stages in their life. And so I started to go through the book and go through the corporal and spiritual works of mercy again, and I realized, well, these are things we can all do, and I applied it to marriage, not only marriage, but family and just our day-to-day relationships. You know, our ultimate goal as a spouse is to help the other person get to heaven. And
right.
for a parent, it's to help the children get to
Yes.
heaven. And so how are we doing that? How are we Christ to other people? And the corporal and spiritual works of mercy can really lead us to that.
That's right.
Yes, yes.
Well, then, of course, with all this in mind, of course, for Astrid, you said how much you enjoyed reading the book, and yet you're not married. So maybe we could give a little insight to others who maybe are not married, but the book could benefit them too.
Absolutely. It's about love. The book is about love. And I think
Right.
it could be applied to any relationship, really.
Right.
So
Yeah.
please get that book. It's beautiful.
And
it's a great
also
gift.
a
too.
shout out to the couples there were 3 or 4 couples in here who gave us their testimony, and they're pretty
that was
powerful, in very
nice.
different situations. One couple struggled with great financial debt and had to work together to come out of it. Another couple struggled with infidelity and some other issues. Another couple was, they were in a mixed faith marriage, and the husband was heartbroken because his wife took a very long time to convert to Catholicism. So there were a lot of really very in-depth and strong stories in there about challenges couples faced.
Well, and this to me is a really nice present too, to give couples who are engaged.
Yes.
Read it before they're married, because
Yes.
this
It could
can
be
help.
for marriage
Absolutely.
enrichment. It could be
That's
for
right.
marriage prep. And we're also working on, guess what, a study guide for diaconate formation.
Oh, that's perfect.
Because there
Yeah.
needs to be, the questions you were asking me in the beginning of the show, could be another tool for couples in formation because it's needed so they can understand the role better as a deacon's wife.
What sacrifices have to
Right.
be given. And again, like you said, Teresa, it's putting the other person first. And I think with a married couple, whether it's a deacon or whatever the husband or wife are doing, the job that they're doing, that's enmeshed in part of that. But we have to, like you said, put your marriage first and your family, and then the career or whatever else is behind
Real
it.
quick, I have about 60 seconds for the homework.
Homework, oh my goodness.
show
Well,
has
of course,
flown
just
by.
quickly, the Kitchen Madonna, available at the EWTN Religious Catalog. She, of course, is our patroness for these programs, and of course, she adorns all of our kitchens at home, and really people like it very much. The next thing of our homework is, of course, you can get the copy of Intimate Graces by going to the EWTN Religious Catalog. And also, there's a beautiful DVD series by Father Andrew Apostoli, also at the Religious Catalog, called Living the Works of Mercy. And that's also a beautiful DVD. Again, these are nice things to do, especially that we're in the midst of the Year of Mercy.
Right.
We can all do a little extra homework for the Year of Mercy.
Amen. On behalf of Janet Morana, Astrid Bennett Gutierrez, and our Pastoral Director, Father Frank Pavone, thanks for watching The Catholic View for Women. We'll see you next time on The Catholic View.